David, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. It's my fault. Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, great. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
I think it's best if you introduce yourself. I know you're the chairman of MCAM, International Innovation Risk Management, but that doesn't tell a whole lot of people what you're really doing.
Yeah, well, from a corporate standpoint, we have since 1998 been the world's largest underwriter of intangible assets used in finance in 168 countries. So in the majority of the countries around the world, our underwriting systems, which include the entire corpus of all patents, patent applications, federal grants, procurement records, e-government records, etc. We have the ability to not only track what is happening and who is involved in what's happening, but we monitor a series of thematic interests for a variety of organizations and individuals, as well as for our own commercial use, because as you probably know, we maintain 3 global equity indices, which are the top performing large cap and mid cap equity indexes worldwide. So our business is to monitor the innovation that's happening around the world, and specifically to monitor the economics of that innovation, the degree to which financial interests are being served, corporate interests are being dislocated, et cetera. So our business is the business of innovation and it's finance.
Also seine Firma, ist der Vorstand von MCAM. Okay, I got that.
Yeah. So obviously from the standpoint of this presentation, as you know, we have reviewed the over 4,000 patents that have been issued around SARS coronavirus. And we have done a very comprehensive review of the financing of all of the manipulations of coronavirus, which gave rise to SARS as a subclade of the beta coronavirus family. And so what I wanted to do was give you a quick overview timeline-wise, because we're not going to go through 4,000 patents on this conversation, but I have sent to you and your team a document that is exceptionally important. This was made public in the spring of 2020.
Yes.
This document, which you do have and can be posted in the public record, is quite critical in that we took the reported gene sequence, which was reportedly isolated as a novel coronavirus, indicated as such by the ICTV, the International Committee on Taxonomy of Viruses of the World Health Organization. We took the actual genetic sequences that were reportedly novel and reviewed those against the patent records that were available as of the spring of 2020. And what we found, as you'll see in this report, are over 120 patented pieces of evidence to suggest that the declaration of a novel coronavirus was actually entirely a fallacy. There was no novel coronavirus. There are countless very subtle modifications of coronavirus sequences that have been uploaded. But there was no single identified novel coronavirus at all. As a matter of fact, we found records in the patent records of sequences attributed to novelty going to patents that were sought as early as 1999. So not only was this not a novel anything, it's actually not only not been novel, it's not been novel for over 2 decades. But let's take a very short and what I'll do is I'll take you on a very short journey through the patent landscape to make sure people understand what happened. But as you know, up until 1999, the topic of coronavirus vis-a-vis the patenting activity around coronavirus was uniquely applied to veterinary sciences. The first vaccine ever patented for coronavirus was actually sought by Pfizer. The application for the first vaccine for coronavirus, which was specifically this S spike protein. So the exact same thing that allegedly we have rushed into invention. The first application was filed January 28th, 2000, 21 years ago. So the idea that we mysteriously stumbled on the way to intervene on vaccines is not only ludicrous, it is incredulous, because Timothy Miller, Sharon Klepfer, Albert Paul Reed, and Elaine Jones on January 28th, 2000, filed what ultimately was issued as U.S. Patent 6372224, which was the spike protein virus, a vaccine for the canine coronavirus, which is actually one of the multiple forms of coronavirus. But as I said, the early work up until 1999 was largely focused in the area of vaccines for animals. The two animals receiving the most attention were probably Ralph Barrick's work on rabbits and the rabbit cardiomyopathy that was associated with significant problems among rabbit breeders, and then canine coronavirus in Pfizer's work to identify how to develop S and spike protein vaccine target candidates, giving rise to the obvious evidence that says that neither the coronavirus concept of a vaccine nor the principle of the coronavirus itself as a pathogen of interest with respect to the spike protein's behavior is anything novel at all. As a matter of fact, it's 22 years old based on patent filings. What's more problematic, and what is actually the most egregious problem, is that Anthony Fauci and NIAID found the malleability of coronavirus to be a potential candidate for HIV vaccines. And so SARS is actually not a natural progression of a zoonotic modification of coronavirus. As a matter of fact, very specifically, in 1999, Anthony Fauci funded research at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, specifically to create, and you cannot help but lament what I'm about to read, because this comes directly from a patent application filed on April 19th, 2002. And you heard the date correctly, 2002, where the NIAID built an infectious replication defective coronavirus that was specifically targeted for human lung epithelium. In other words, we made SARS. And we patented it on April 19th, 2002, before there was ever any alleged outbreak in Asia, which, as you know, followed that by several months. That patent, issued as U.S. Patent 7279327, that patent clearly lays out in very specific gene sequencing the fact that we knew that the ACE receptor, the ACE2 binding domain, the S1 spike protein, and other elements of what we have come to know as this scourge pathogen, was not only engineered, but could be synthetically modified in the laboratory using nothing more than gene sequencing technologies, taking computer code and turning it into a pathogen or an intermediate of the pathogen. And that technology was funded exclusively in the early days as a means by which we could actually harness coronavirus as a vector to distribute HIV vaccine. I'll let you translate that because that's a lot of material.
Okay. Also, David hat eben. Okay.
Okay. So it gets worse.
Uh-oh.
My organization was asked to monitor biological and chemical weapons treaty violations in the very early days of 2000. You'll remember the anthrax events in September of 2001. And we were part of an investigation that gave rise to the congressional inquiry into not only the anthrax origins, but also into what was unusual behavior around Bayer's ciprofloxacin drug, which was a drug used as a potential treatment for anthrax poisoning. And throughout the fall of 2001, we began monitoring an enormous number of bacterial and viral pathogens that were being patented through NIH, NIAID, US AMRID, the US Armed Services Infectious Disease Program, and a number of other agencies internationally that collaborated with them. And our concern was that coronavirus was being seen as not only a potential manipulatable agent for potential use as a vaccine vector, but it was also very clearly being considered as a biological weapon candidate. And so our first public reporting on this took place prior to the SARS outbreak in the latter part of 2001. So you can imagine how disappointed I am to be sitting here 20 years later, having 20 years earlier pointed that there was a problem looming on the horizon with respect to coronavirus. But after the alleged outbreak, and I will always say alleged outbreak, because I think it's important for us to understand that coronavirus as a circulating pathogen inside of the viral model that we have is actually not new to the human condition and is not new to the last 2 decades. It's actually been part of the sequence of proteins that circulates for quite a long time. But the alleged outbreak that took place in China in 2002 going into 2003 gave rise to a very problematic April 2003 filing by the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And this topic is of critical importance to get the nuance very precise. Because in addition to filing the entire gene sequence on what became SARS coronavirus, which is actually a violation of 35 US Code Section 101, you cannot patent a naturally occurring substance. The 35 US Code Section 101 violation was patent number 7220852. Now, that patent also had a series of derivative patents associated with it. These are patent applications that were broken apart because they were of multiple patentable subject matter. But these include US Patent 46592703P, which is actually a very interesting designation. US Patent 776521, that is 776521. these patents not only covered the gene sequence of SARS coronavirus, but also covered the means of detecting it using RT-PCR. Now, the reason why that's a problem is if you actually both own the patent on the gene itself and you own the patent on its detection, you have a cunning advantage to being able to control 100% of the provenance of not only the virus itself, but also its detection. Meaning you have entire scientific and message control. And this patent, sought by the CDC, was allegedly justified by their public relations team as being sought so that everyone would be free to be able to research coronavirus. The only problem with that statement is it's a lie. And the reason why it's a lie is because the Patent Office not once but twice rejected the patent on the gene sequence as unpatentable because the gene sequence was already in the public domain. In other words, prior to CDC's filing for a patent, the Patent Office found 99.9% identity with the already existing coronavirus recorded in the public domain. And over the rejection of the patent examiner, and after having to pay an appeal fine in 2006 and 2007, the CDC overrode the Patent Office's rejection of their patent and ultimately in 2007 got the patent on SARS coronavirus. Wow. So every public statement that CDC has made that said that this was in the public interest is falsifiable by their own paid bribe to the Patent Office. This is not something that's subtle, and to make matters worse, they paid an additional fee to keep their application private. Last time I checked, if you're trying to make information available for the public research, you would not pay a fee to keep the information private. I wish I could have made up anything I just said, but all of that is available in the public patent archive record, which any member of the public can review. And the public pair, as it's called at the United States Patent Office, has not only the evidence, but the actual documents which I have in my possession. Now, this is critically important. It's critically important because fact checkers have repeatedly stated that the novel coronavirus, designated as SARS CoV2, is in fact distinct from the CDC patent. And here's both the genetic and the patent problem. If you look at the gene sequence that is filed by CDC in 2003, again in 2005, and then again in 2006, what you find is identity in somewhere between 89 to 99% of the sequence overlaps that have been identified in what's called the novel subclade of SARS CoV2. What we know is that the core designation of SARS coronavirus, which is actually the clade of the beta coronavirus family, and the subclade that has been called SARS-CoV-2 have to overlap from a taxonomic point of view. You cannot have SARS designation on a thing without it first being SARS. So the disingenuous fact checking that has been done saying that somehow or another CDC has nothing to do with this particular patent or this particular pathogen is beyond both the literal credibility of the published sequences, and it's also beyond credulity when it comes to the ICTV taxonomy, because it very clearly states that this is in fact a subclade of the clade called SARS coronavirus. Now, what's important is on the 28th of April, and listen to the date very carefully because this date is problematic. 3 days after CDC filed the patent on the SARS coronavirus in 2003. 3 days later, Sequoia Pharmaceuticals, a company that was set up in Maryland, Sequoia Pharmaceuticals on the 28th of April, 2003, filed a patent on antiviral agents of treatment and control of infections by coronavirus. CDC filed 3 days earlier, and then the treatment was available 3 days later. Now, just hold that thought for a second.
Who is Sequoia Pharmaceuticals?
Well, there you go. That's a good question, because Sequoia Pharmaceuticals and ultimately Ablynx Pharmaceuticals became rolled into the proprietary holdings of Pfizer, Crucell, and Johnson & Johnson.
Wow.
So ask yourself a simple question. How would one have a patent on a treatment for a thing that had been invented 3 days earlier?
Yeah.
The patent in question, the April 28th, 2003 patent, 7151163, issued to Sequoia Pharmaceuticals, has another problem. The problem is it was issued and published before the CDC patent on coronavirus was actually allowed. So the degree to which the information could have been known by any means other than insider information between those parties is zero. It is not physically possible for you to patent a thing that treats a thing that had not been published because CDC had paid to keep it secret. This, my friends, is the definition of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, and collusion. This is not a theory. This is evidence. You cannot have information in the future inform a treatment for a thing that did not exist.
This could well blow up into a RICO case ultimately.
This is it is a RICO case. It's not could blow up into it. It is a RICO case. And the RICO pattern, which was established in April of 2003 for the first coronavirus, was played out to exactly the same schedule when we see SARS CoV2 show up, when we have Moderna getting the spike protein sequence by phone from the Vaccine Research Center at NIAID prior to the definition of the novel subclade. How do you treat a thing before you actually have the thing?
I have to translate this. This is, you can't make this up. Definitely not. Also, ziemlich unglaublich. Das ist, ich habe gesagt, das könnte explodieren als RICO-Case. Er sagt, das ist einer.
Yeah, well, it's going to get worse here.
Oh no, it can't get worse.
Oh, it does. In the 5th of June, 2008, which is an important date because it is actually around the time when DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program in the United States, actively took an interest in coronavirus as a biological weapon. June 5th, 2008, Ablynx, which as you know is now part of Sanofi, filed a series of patents that specifically targeted what we've been told is the novel feature of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And you heard what I just said. This is the 5th of June, 2008.
They filed what?
Specifically, they targeted what was called the polybasic cleavage site for SARS-CoV, the novel spike protein, and the ACE2 receptor binding domain, which is allegedly novel to SARS-CoV-2. And all of that was patented on the 5th of June, 2008. And those patents in sequence were issued between November 24th of 2015 which was US patent 9193780. So that one came out after the gain of function moratorium. That one came after the MERS outbreak in the Middle East. But what you find is that then in 2016, 2017, 2019, a series of patents all covering not only the RNA strands, but also the subcomponents of the gene strands were all issued to Ablynx and Sanofi. And then we have Crucell, we have Rubius Therapeutics, we have Children's Medical Corporation, we have countless others that include Ludwig Maximilians Universität in München, Protein Science Corporation, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, University of Iowa, University of Hong Kong, Chinese National Human Genome Center in Shanghai, all identifying in patent filings that ranged from 2008 until 2017, every attribute that was allegedly uniquely published by the single reference publication, the novel bat coronavirus, reveals, quote, natural insertions at the S1, S2, 2 cleavage site of the spike protein and possible recombinant 3 origin of the SARS-CoV2 virus. The paper that has been routinely used to identify the novel virus, unfortunately, if you actually take what they report to be novel, you find 73 patents issued between 2008 and 2019, which have the elements that were allegedly novel in the SARS-CoV2, specifically as it relates to the polybasic cleavage site, the ACE2 receptor binding domain, and the spike protein. So the clinically novel components of the clinically unique, clinically contagious, you know where I'm going with this, okay? There was no outbreak of SARS because we had engineered all of the elements of that. And by 2016, the paper that was funded during the gain of function moratorium that said that the SARS coronavirus was poised for human emergence, written by none other than Ralph Baric, was not only poised for human emergence, but it was patented for commercial exploitation 73 times.
Didn't Ralph Baric, I think I saw a video clip with him giving a speech in which he explicitly told the audience that you can make a lot of money with this.
Yes, you can. And he has made a lot of money doing this.
Oh.
So for those who want to live in the illusion that somehow or another that's the end of the story, be prepared for a greater disappointment, because somebody knew something in 2015 and 2016, which gave rise to my favorite quote of this entire pandemic. And by that, I'm not being cute. My favorite quote of this pandemic was a statement made in 2015 by Peter Daszak. The statement that was made by Peter Daszak in 2015, reported in the National Academies of Press publication, February 12th, 2016, and I'm quoting, "We need to increase public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures such as a pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process, end quote.
That's quite shocking because I thought that.
Let me just read that again, just because I don't know if I might get lost in translation. So let me just go ahead and read it slowly.
Yeah.
And as Americans love to do when speaking to a multilingual audience, maybe I should say it louder. I won't. We need to increase public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures, such as a pan-coronavirus vaccine. A key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process, end quote.
That's really, I mean, Peter Doshi, wasn't he the one who?
No, Peter Daszak.
Oh, Daszak.
Peter Daszak, the head of EcoHealth Alliance.
Okay.
Peter Doshi is the good guy.
Yeah, I was just.
Peter Daszak, the person who was independently corroborating the Chinese non-lab leak, non-theory, because there wasn't a lab leak. This was an intentional bioweaponization of spike proteins to inject into people to get them addicted to a pan-coronavirus vaccine. This has nothing to do with a pathogen that was released, and every study that's ever been launched to try to verify a lab leak is a red herring.
And there's really nothing that is new in this.
Nothing. Zero. 73 patents on everything clinically novel. 73, all issued before 2019. And I'm going to give you the biggest bombshell of all to prove that this was actually not a release of anything, because patent 7279327, the patent on the recombinant nature of that lung targeting coronavirus, was transferred mysteriously from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill to the National Institutes of Health in 2018. Now, here's the problem with that. Under the Bayh-Dole Act, the US government already has what's called a march-in right provision. That means if the US government has paid for research, they are entitled to benefit from that research at their demand or at their whim. So explain why in 2017 and 2018, suddenly the National Institutes of Health have to take ownership of the patent that they already had rights to, held by the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And how did they need to file a certificate of correction to make sure that it was legally enforceable? Because there was a typographical error in the grant reference in the first filing. So they needed to make sure that not only did they get it right, but they needed to make sure every typographical error that was contained in the patent was correct. On the single patent required to develop the Vaccine Research Institute's mandate, which was shared between the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in November of 2019 and Moderna in November of 2019, when UNC Chapel Hill, NIAID, and Moderna began the sequencing of a spike protein vaccine a month before an outbreak ever happened.
You have all the evidence, right?
Yep.
I'll have to translate this.